Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Here's Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. Caribbean economy is doing well, but the International Monetary Fund, the I.M.F, projects slowdown. This story takes the lead in today's edition of Caribbean Perspective for Thursday, 9th February 2023. Details when we return.
Hubbard's Multi-Department Mount Gay and Hubbard's Tire Bay, located at the Building Supplies Compound in Grand Anse, are reminding the motoring public that another round for licensing and inspection has begun. Just arrived on new shipments of quality furrowed and torque tires to fit all makes and models of vehicles at competitive pricing. Shop early to avoid the hassle of long lines. WhatsApp them on 473-405-5482. Hubbard's, quality service, affordable prices.
Welcome back. Caribbean economies have been doing much better post-pandemic due to rapid growth in the tourism market and the strength of the commodities industry, says Acting Director for Western Hemisphere Department of the International Monetary Fund, Nigel Chalk. He was speaking during a brief media interaction with Caribbean journalists who were on a training at an I.M.F media workshop in Barbados recently. Andre Huey of SKN Newsline was part of that workshop and made this report.
If you look at the Caribbean is really two different stories. For the tourism-dependent economies, we saw a lot of very fast growth coming out of the pandemic. And now that's starting to wane as we get back to more normal economic growth rates. But generally, the region's doing quite a lot better. Tourism, in many cases, is higher than it was even before the pandemic period. And the region's benefiting a lot from pretty strong growth, particularly in the US and Canada and to some extent Europe. And then, but nevertheless, it's a similar picture to Latin America. The economy is slowing, inflation is still relatively high across the region, and high inflation, particularly in things like food and fuel. So again, I think it's going to feel like a difficult year for that part of the region.
For commodity-producing economies in the Caribbean, like Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados, Mr. Chalk said they too have been doing well due to the resilience of the commodities industry.
And then you have the commodity-dependent countries in the Caribbean, and they're doing very well because commodities are quite strong. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has meant that gas prices, oil prices are quite high. And so Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana are growing very, very strongly. We expect to continue growing very, very strongly. They also are suffering from relatively high inflation, which would be something that they'll have to manage during the course of the year. But in some sense, it's a little bit easier to manage that when there's a lot of income coming in from natural resource revenues.
However, Mr. Chalk said there will be a slowing down of growth in Latin America, which will make it a difficult year for the region.
The region is slowing. We've gone from a growth rate that was around 7% coming out of the crisis, the pandemic. We were at 4% last year, and we're going to be below 2% this year. So it's a slowing economy. That means less job growth, less employment, less real income for households. And at the same time, it's a region that's still suffering from quite high inflation. So this year we see sort of the economy slowing, bottoming out, and inflation coming down. But during that period, I think it's going to be quite a tough year as we sort of manage our way through that period.
The I.M.F revised its projections of the global economy last week, saying there have been slight improvements in economic activity due to consumer resilience and the opening of the borders in China. While the I.M.F indicates that we may avoid a global recession, growth is expected to slow this year as central banks continue to raise interest rates to tame inflation. Andre Huey, SKN Newsline.
ZNS's Altovis Munnings shares a bit of the history of the Caribbean community ahead of the Bahamas hosting the 2023 CARICOM Heads of Government meeting.
Just like the Bahamas, the Caribbean Community and Common Market, commonly known as CARICOM, is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. Taking a trip down memory lane, the idea to even create a Caribbean community was made through a 15-year effort to fulfill the hope of regional integration with the British West Indies Federation in 1958. The government of Trinidad and Tobago later proposed the full establishment of a Caribbean community and assembled the first Heads of Government Conference in July 1963. It was at the 8th Heads of Government Conference of CARIFTA in April 1973 in Georgetown, Guyana, when the decision to establish the Caribbean Community was finalized. CARICOM was officially launched on July 4th, 1973, with the signing of the Treaty of Chaguaramas by the Prime Ministers of Barbados, Guyana, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. The treaty was later revised in 2002 to allow for the eventual establishment of a single market and a single economy. Stretching from here in the Bahamas in the north to Suriname and Guyana in South America, CARICOM currently comprises 15 member states and 5 associate members. It's home to approximately 16 million citizens, 60% of whom are under the age of 30 years old. The organization's main purposes are to promote economic integration and cooperation among its members, ensure that the benefits of integration are equitably shared, as well as coordinate foreign policy. Now, CARICOM rests on 4 main pillars: economic integration, foreign policy coordination, human and social development, and security. These elements are discussed by leaders of member states who shape the community's policies and priorities with meetings twice a year. And in 2023, Caribbean heads of government, led by current CARICOM chairman, Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, the Honorable Philip Davis, will convene right here in the Bahamas next week to address pertinent issues, including the COVID-19 pandemic, the Haitian crisis, security and border issues, as well as talks with Canadian Prime Minister, the Honorable Justin Trudeau. Reporting in studio for the Bahamas tonight, I'm Altaviz Munnings.
You're listening to Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick.
A former Prime Minister of the Bahamas, Hubert Minnis, comments on the threats made against current Prime Minister Philip Davis. ZNS News has more.
In other news this evening, having also been on the receiving end of death threats, former Prime Minister, the Most Honourable Dr. Hubert Minnis, says he's never seen security taken to the extent it has in the aftermath of death threats against Prime Minister, the Honourable Philip Davis. Minnis says he's certain all prime ministers would have been threatened before, adding that in the past he did not report it until the last minute. That is, after his aides would have advised him to take it more seriously and report the matter to the Commissioner of Police. Now, the former Prime Minister says he continued to proceed as usual.
Because I am of the view that when a Prime Minister feels that he no longer feels safe among his own people, that's time to go. That's time to go. So I have always carried on with my normal life. But this Prime Minister is obviously threatened by the people. He brought out the entire police force almost. I mean, what is there to fear? What is there to fear? I do not condone violence. All right? I do not support violence. I feel that Prime Ministers should be protected. All right? But I thought it was an overkill.
Now, asked if the current political climate could have led to threats against the sitting Prime Minister, Minnis contends that violence and immigration are out of control, adding that the public has to feel the government is serious about addressing such problems. And the first step, he says, will be having this shantytown injunction lifted.
It is unfair. I have gone through that myself, where I wanted to construct a wall at my place. I subsequently wanted to take it up to 6 foot. I had the blocks laid for 6 foot. I was approached by Ministry of Works and said that the law states that I can only go 4 feet. I subsequently removed the additional 2 feet and complied by the law. If I and other Bahamians can comply by the law, they have to comply by the law. We are a law-abiding, respective country. And that's the issue. They must have the injunction removed and deal with it appropriately. You would be surprised how that would really deflate all the anger that's going on today.
In other news, Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, Reginald Amor, wants the investigation into the missing Vindra Naipaul Coolman case file to be completed before making any further comments. Details in this TTT News item.
The Office of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs confirmed that the missing Vindra Naipaul Coolman case file reappeared on Monday. The Attorney General was asked to advise the Upper House on Tuesday where the file was found. In the statement from retired Justice Stanley John, the appointed lead investigator on the matter, he confirmed that the file, which reportedly vanished in 2020, had been found. He indicated that he was informed by the Acting Solicitor General, Carleen Senath, that the file in question was handed over to her.
Statement by Justice Stanley John. I do not propose to answer the question, which is the subject of a continuing investigation. That is for the investigation team to investigate and to report on in due course.
Opposition Senator Wade Mark sought to find out who presented the missing file to the Acting Solicitor General.
May I answer that by saying there is nothing to clarify. The subject of the reappearance and who handed that file or located it continues to be part of Justice John's investigation, on which he will report in due course.
St. Kitts and Nevis's newest Governor General, Dame Marcella Liburd, said she is committed to her role and to the country's quest for development as a sustainable small island developing state. Glenn Bart of SKN Newsline has that story.
Speaking at the swearing-in ceremony at Government House on 4th February 2023, the Governor General indicated her resolve to support the quest according to the Constitution and laws of the country. Dame Marcella hinted at an active role guided by the oaths she had taken.
We in this small island developing state face many challenges, not the least of which include emerging from the ravages of the COVID-19 pandemic, addressing inequality and poverty, the impact of the ongoing war in Europe, the effects of climate change on food security and the environment, provision of proper healthcare and education, promoting the good governance agenda, providing job opportunities, especially for the youth, the high cost of living, the relationship between St. Christopher and Nevis, and resolving our water and energy issues. It takes serious decision makers at all levels and bold decisions to address and find solutions to these ongoing and emerging challenges. It will be unpleasant at times. It is not always going to be smooth. But constant communication and consultation will make them easier to be resolved. As head of state, I will wholeheartedly assume my role and lend my experience, support, and goodwill to ensure that St. Christopher and Nevis transitions to being a sustainable island state and move to that new level of nationhood envisaged in our thrust to embrace and inculcate our identity as Kittitians and Nevisians and as a nation.
Deputy Prime Minister Dr. Jeffrey Hanley delivered remarks on the occasion as Prime Minister Dr. Terence Chu was wrapping up his participation in meetings held in St. Lucia. Glenn Bart reporting for SK Newsline.
Over in Jamaica, the former FSC Executive Director to get 3 months' salary due to the termination of his fixed 3-year contract. TVJ News has more.
Everton McFarlane resigned as Executive Director of the FSC following questions about regulatory oversight due to a multi-billion-dollar fraud at Stocks and Securities Limited, SSL. A release from the Finance Ministry stated that Mr. McFarlane earned $16 million per year, as well as other benefits. There's also a 25% taxable gratuity in lieu of pension and housing allowance of roughly $1.3 million per year. Mr. McFarlane has also agreed to buy the assigned motor vehicle under the motor vehicle policy for the public sector. Mr. McFarlane's contract was renewed in August 2020 and should have ended in July 2023. He waived his rights to payments for accrued vacation leave.
Hubbards is once again innovating the way you shop with its new online store, providing 24-hour shopping convenience. You can shop now for appliances, hardware, houseware, building material, and more. Free delivery island-wide. Start shopping now at hubbardsHardware.gd. Safe, convenient, reliable.
I am Eddie Frederick. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.